Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we are going over Chapter 17, Aeril 5. So, Aeril 5 is the beginning of Act 2 for Aeril's story, beginning a few days after Aeril 4, where we saw Aeril at basically what was seemingly the nadir of his emotional state to give himself over to Egenhand for whatever secret organization Egenhand seems to lead. Aeril 5 takes that and says, well, it turns out actually we weren't at the bottom of the barrel. The barrel opens out, and we can go a lot, lot deeper. This chapter has Aeril and Egenhand go into the wilds and encounter something which separates Aeril from Egenhand. And the rest of the chapter is essentially Aeril recuperating in a cave, lamenting himself and all his works. So, this chapter deals a lot with themes of memory, of loss, and really just how fucked Iril's head is. But without further ado, let's begin with the epigraph from Otis the Traveler's Geographies, which is the same text which is cited at the beginning of Iril 2. By Book 1, Section 4, this is one of the opening paragraphs of the work. Thamu's primordial waters nevertheless complicate this endeavor, for just as a house bears the marks of its previous occupants, or a gang of laborers tales of a grizzled foreman, we stand atop the ruins of unseen ancients, barely poking above a vast sea of antiquity. What matters of the world are there make? What lands or laws or lingerings, even the wastes themselves, we cannot say, only that where we forget, the earth remembers. So Otis here is talking about his plan to describe the regions of the world, their history and cultures and peoples. And he says that this is difficult because there's a lot of things in the past which we just don't know about. With this, in fact, this language of poking atop ancient ruins in a vast sea of antiquity mirrors the opening lines of H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu. Really, there's this great idea of cosmicism that infects the entire chapter, for lack of a better term. And then, in addition to that, he's saying these things in the past, we know someone built them. We don't know who, we don't know what ends. But Iroh isn't thinking about any of that. Iroh sees the entire world, and he instead is thinking about the prince, the object of his just hate, as he calls it. And this is actually a bit interesting from a sort of writing style standpoint, because Iroh 5 and the previous chapter, Lucian 4, have a very similar opening structure. They both start at the beginning of point A, and then immediately jump back to before that in that day, and then move forward from there. So, Iroh and Lucian go not towards Faircalais, they go south to near Sirkaya, the land of the Scythethets, and then travel east along the White Hills. But, well, they travel south and then they travel east into the White Hills. And we get this very elaborate metaphor again of Iril's and Egenhand's horses are kicking up dust, like how necromancers pull up the souls of the dead and from the underworld and give them new life. This is necromancer as someone who resurrects dead spirits to talk to them. Think Odyssey Book 11 rather than like making zombies necromancy. In fact, this idea of having a necromancer find souls of the dead and raise them up to talk to the dead is a thing that appears in lots of ancient literature. It happens, well, in the Odyssey, as mentioned, it happens in the Aeneid, kind of, with Aeneas going to the underworld with the Sibyl of Cumae, and then it also actually happens in the Hebrew Bible with the story of the Witch of Endor resurrecting the soul of Saul to talk to him. So, we also get this interesting comparison where is riding his pale brown gelding, and Egenhand is riding a midnight stallion. The midnight stallion being a powerful horse, and a pale gelding being a weak horse, symbolizing the power divide between them. So, Iroh also smells this spirit of death is also spirit of despair, and that same corruption, that same sense of despair is on all the people because of the coming drought and the coming famine thereafter. There's a vagrant. There are people goading a donkey. The donkey itself is sickly. And then there's a decad, a group of 10, which is a significant number in a sort of numerology, religious sense. And they are bearing a sarcophagus of pale Thesian marble, Theiss, Thesian or Theiss being from this island that's in the center of the map. And even amidst the dead, they did not deny him pity, Iroh pity, and averted their gaze because, sure, they're carrying a dead body in a sarcophagus. but were likely drawn by a horse or a donkey or something like that. But they see Aeril and they're like, oh, it's a living man who's lost an eye, feel pity on him. And Aeril is very upset about this. And one of them, she holds up her fingers against her breast, a ward against the evil eye, which is directly parallel to Aeril's evil eye, or rather, here there's a conflation where the Aeril's lost amulet, which itself looks like an eye, is either an amulet which wards against the evil eye, or is it itself the evil eye which is warded against? Either respect, Aeril's missing one of his eyes, or rather, as is mentioned later in the chapter, Aeril used to have three eyes, his left eye, his right eye, and his necklace, but now he only has one eye, his left eye. And Aeril is very bitter at this. Aeril is just in a bad emotional state this entire chapter. And he says, they're already dead, because of the drought. They just don't know it yet. Or maybe he's thinking of the fact that they too will eventually just die at one point or another. And why are they giving pity to the living when they should be giving pity to the dead? And then he realizes they're not going to Fair Calais, which is deeply, deeply frustrating to him. And here we have a bunch of interesting similes about the forest. We have birds crying shrills one woke into the blade in the dark, which is a metaphor of assassination. Shades flickering between cedar and cypress, oak familiar whispers on their leaves. This familiar whisper is a daughter, she will be a bearer of your curse, something which Aeril is having living in his head rent free and has for basically a week at this point. And he's hearing it constantly on weaves and leaves. And the ideas of leaves whispering, say that three times fast, is a recurring motif throughout the story. That the souls of the dead have to go somewhere, and they can go into the trees, they can go into the sky, they can go into the earth, they can go into the sea, but their voices endure, and either the murmurs of the stones, the drums of the deep, the wind in the trees, the waves, and so on. That the souls of the dead have a way of making themselves heard in one way or another. And then mirroring the assassination symbol here, we have twigs littering branch and earth, daggers made of what no dagger ought to be made, which is again a very violent metaphor. And then we also have another metaphor about spying and just covert stuff of the insects and their thousand eyes, which is a million eyes, bearing countless eyes from which no one could hide, for all of them was a new master. Which juxtaposing Eggcan in front of countless eyes is fascinating, but that might be important later, or might not be. And then Aeril repeatedly has images show up in his mind's eye in this chapter, and this is him in a ditch or strumped against a wall or on his knees, which are all meant to evoke some kind of being murdered or being exploited and then murdered. And he's thinks, no, if Egan had wanted me dead, I would already would have been dead. And the Gem Cheeks chain is the chain of Gem Cheeks Sortira, the goddess of death. But where is Egan leading him into the wilds for some reason? And there's this interesting thing that going into the wild, going into places which are sparsely inhabited, is a thing very in the Christian tradition, is very associated with doing something spiritual. That Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days and is tempted by the devil, and that one of the gospel begins with this quoting a passage from Isaiah, which talks about going into the desert and making a path for God there. So Egenhand, by leading Iroh into the wilderness, is essentially playing some kind of role of a cult leader, separating him from the world as his lord and master. But the count, and then here we again stress the point: Egenhand is not a spy. He's not an ordinator. He's not Holy Blade. So why is he take? What is this quasi-religiousness of him taking him into the wilderness? What is it for? And what's at the Weeping Tower? But we'll see. However, Iroh has a hidden thing, which is the Ibex horn, which we saw in Iroh 4, which is now essentially playing the role of his lost amulet, but it's a very poor imitation. It is larger, he can't keep it easily concealed, and Egenan knows about it, or at least he thinks that he knows Egenan knows about it. However, Egenhand doesn't know that and Egenhand likely knows that he knows, but Egenhand doesn't know about, or at least Aeril thinks Egenhand doesn't know that Aeril blames Edmund for shooting him, and Aeril for that reason wants Edmund dead. And so as it stands, Edmund and Lucian both blame themselves. Fortuna blames Egenhand. Aeril blames Edmund, and Egenhand thinks Aeril blames Lucian or Egenhand or something else. So, but in all likelihood, it was actually Egenhand. So we have but the idea that Aeril, the feeling in Aeril's heart is a flame. It is a flame of vengeance. It is a flame of hatred. But flame is also something which can provide warmth, even if it is something that also burns. And then we go into this ruin, which the ruin is built by some culture which seems to be a predecessor to the culture that built Castle Ravencroft, or whatever culture that the Morulei are from. And that these, or it might just be that it's a large circular building with pillars placed in it because it's where you would place pillars in a building. But the idea, but is nevertheless is meant to represent sort of a ancient temple with the large rectangular building and the apse at the back where the cult icon is being held. And instead of instead of the cult icon or whatever would normally be, there is a other sort of cult icon, which is a crypt stone, as they're called. And these cryptstones are essentially large stones found more in the northern reaches with a different type of stone, and they were placed ringing an ecological dead zone called the Great Northern Waste, as well as other wastes, which are these ecological dead zones caused either by like magical or some other means. We don't actually know what's causing them, but it has very post-apocalyptic vibe. And the legend is that the cryptstones keep the wastes contained. So the fact that the cryptstones have been slowly moved and replaced over time makes us think that maybe the wastes have a chance of expanding. That the cryptstones are meant to represent an exclusionary zone around the wastes, and the fact they're being removed could mean that the exclusionary zone is being encroached into by whatever's in the waste, or this is just all superstition. But either way, it would essentially be like going into a ruin while hiking in the mountains and seeing a giant biohazard or nuclear or like a radioactive symbol just like staked into the ground. It would be spooky. But the funny thing is that it is called a relic in the text, and a relic in English is a thing which is usually a part of like a historical person, a historical figure, or a religious person, usually a saint, and there's supposed to be some kind of special property or reverence held towards this part of their remains. So, and relic itself, which are housed in reliquaries, comes from the Latin reliquus, which means something left behind. So a relic is literally something left behind by those who came before. So the relic's design, however, with this man with muscular calves and the master of animals motif with lions, which are entreating his calves like house cats. This is meant to evoke more of like the Assyrian and the more like Neo-Assyrian release that you see, or that you see in the Near East. So it definitely is from a different culture, both from whoever has built the structure it's currently in and from whatever culture Hyrule is from. Never mind the fact that the language that is written on it all across the lower side of the cryptstone is illegible, even though it is theorized to be some ancient progenitor of Norian. Think Linear A to modern Greek, or some kind of very old Futhark that isn't fully translated compared to modern English or modern like Norwegian or something like that. Or even better yet, say like the Etruscan tongue compared to say modern Italian. So there are the other things that the statue has been effaced, both literally in that where the face of the statue has been carved off, but also that the statue has been effaced, that it has been purposely vandalized in some way or another. So it's a sort of a pun where it's been effaced, the face has been taken off and it's been effaced, it was just vandalized, or rather, it was vandalized, but in particular, the face was taken off. It was effaced. So, we also get a lore that at the Alabastron there is another crypt stone. We have no idea how many crypt stones there are. However, seeing that Lucian saw a giant stone next to a funerary procession in Vlotten on the Crossings suggests that that also might have been a crypt stone, although maybe not. And then however, the cryptstone at the Alabastron is flanked by two dragon eggs, which are also these mysterious things with the runes and weird carvings, and we don't know what they do, we don't know where they came from. An oddity amidst oddities. And here they dine on dates, oats, almonds, and wine gone half sour. So essentially materials you eat while hiking long distances or riding long distances. And Aeril finally voices his question of where are they going. And Egenan says, "Oh, we're going to this ruin called the Weeping Tower, where we've already established that there's sort of this difference between like the cultures in the White Hills, which raise their dead up to the sky, and the cultures in the valleys, which lower their dead into the ground. The different conceptions of where the afterlife is, where the kingdom of the gods is, and therefore what is the right thing to do." However, the idea of raising up structures to the sky to get to where the gods are should also make you think of the Lord of Blackbirds, suggesting that this legend is in fact a cultural memory of some possibly defunct or previously more in vogue funerary practice, which later became less, possibly less practice due to the prevalence of whatever culture was not in the mountains. So, Iroh asks if the Weeping Tower is a spire, and Egenhand says, strangely enough, it's not a spire, but it's a facsimile of a spire that we don't actually know. We don't know who built the spires. We don't know what they do. We don't know if they do anything. But he says that it was built to accomplish the same ends as the spires, which would be to reach the gods. And well, with one of the spires being the Alabastron, one of the spires being the Temple of the Triarchy, and one of the spires being the Origins Tower. Perhaps you might get the idea in Fair Calais that these spires are meant to reach the gods. But Iroh is insistent about going to Fair Calais, and Egenhand's like, "Oh, why do you want to go to Fair Calais?" And Iroh shoots back Egenhand's words back at him. This is a little bit of revealing that Iroh does it while he is aligned with Egenhand, he's not wholly given himself over to Egenhand in spirit as well as body. That Iroh's following Egenhand around, but he's been keeping secrets from Egenhand, and now he is being insolent towards Egenhand, or at least being a bit less disingenuous. So he wants to go to Fair Calais to kill Edmund, but he's saying, "I want to uphold the peace of the gods." And Egenhand counters with, "The peace of the gods only needs to be pursued in its temples in Fair Calais if the priests are a problem." And then Iron says priests can be misled with, by priests, he means Edmund. Edmund, in fact, being the son of the living Saint Tychon Otho. And Egenhand says, "Yes, but the priests can be misled by their fathers, or maybe the priests aren't misled, but they are catering to a profane, the practitioners of the temple, who are themselves to blame because they prefer lies to truth." So suddenly, this has gone from a coded discussion of wanting to kill Edmund to a coded discussion of where institutional evil comes from. Is it that there are bad actors who pollute an entire system with their bad actors thing, with their bad actorness and the things they want to do? Or is it that these people are merely inheriting a corrupt system that they have been brought up to believe is working as intended? Or is it actually that the actors inside the institution are just doing their best, but the people demanding work from them, either their higher ups or the people they're meant to serve, have bad morals, shall you say, and that they instead want these people to work towards evil ends. Iroh has little to say about this. And then Egenhand points to the crypt stone itself and says, he again restates what it is, and Egenhand is very clearly baiting out something from Iroh, and the thing he's baiting out is divest yourself of everything. That the stone in some way has been divested of everything, its homeland, its name, its function, even the person it's meant to depict. And then Aeril rips a date between his fingers and says, "When did you hear this one?" And Aeril, it's only been a couple days since they started going south, but Aeril hasn't exactly been the most mentally stable, and he's also got some other things going on. So he's like, when did you say that? And he's like, ah, the morning we left. That's when, my lord. It should be mentioned that between this chapter and Fortuna 4, when we heard him actually say it, I changed the line from divest everything of you to divest yourself of everything because the specific level of nuance there, I thought it was not, the juice was not worth the squeeze, so to say. So in Fortuna 4, it's been retconned to divest yourself of everything at all instances. And Aeril then asks, "Why do you wear your glove?" Which, whereas we've been calling back a couple chapters now, here we again call back Lucian 3. And this explanation of why Egenhand wears the glove in Aeril 5 is directly parallel to Egenhand's explanation in Lucian 3. However, Egenhand gives a very different thing. Egenhand says in Lucian 3 that it's a sort of thing about reminding him of his duty and where he's from and things like that. But here, Egenhand is again saying it's about where he's from, but there's more to it than that. Egenhand essentially says that flesh is fluid, everything's fluid, but if everything about us is fluid, what actually is the self? And he's again baiting out an answer of Iroh, and Egenhand says ultimately, what we are is a collection of experiences and memories, and that he talks about muscle memory, for instance, the soldier, the rhetorician, the carpenter, and rogue, which this idea of someone languishing in prison and then regaining their skill upon release might make you think of something else in the story. But he's essentially saying that we are our memories, that that ourselves are derived from our memories. So therefore, altering the memories alters oneself, and maintaining the memories maintains oneself. And through memory, experiences are essentially immortal. Through memory, eternal lies the light of the stars, the song of the earth, the touch of a prince. The touch of a prince specifically is an interesting phrase because Egenhand might be talking about, say, meeting Edmund, or he might be talking about a more nebulous of interaction with authority, or he might be talking about a different kind of prince. We have yet to see. There are a couple princes mentioned in the story, one of which is a more mythological, if you would. And then Iroh says, "What horror then to lose yours?" Where we have is revealed both in Iroh 4 and is elaborated on Iroh 5 that Iroh's had been having recurring dreams and nightmares of being his grandfather. So the idea of Iroh dreaming about being someone else is then sort of dreaming and having in a mind state of being someone else erodes oneself a sense of self. Being in an altered state, whether this is pretending to be someone else or having dreams about being someone else or being someone else through the influence of some kind of drug, all these things have some way of because they alter memory, because they juxtapose your memories with others inside your mind, they have a way of eroding oneself in one way or another through a continued exposure to being another person. The person underneath erodes. You cannot wear a mask without the mask changing who you are underneath if you wear that mask for long enough. And then Iroh and then says, "What memory does the glove recall?" And Egenhand more or less is talking straight with him, says it recalls a soil, both near and ancient, the dregs at the base of a wine jug. And this idea of the dregs at the base of a wine jug is a dual function metaphor. One is a metaphor that is syntactically and uh, the meaning and structure of the metaphor is the same as the metaphor of stones at the bottom of the pool. That while the water, or in this case, wine, flows and changes, there's this part at the bottom of the fluid that maintains constant, that there's some element of the self that remains constant, even though the place you are in changes. And that although context changes, the internal person remains somehow constant in some essential in some essential characteristic. Um, However, the other part of this soil is that wine, although it is put in jug and transported around the world, the dregs indicate where the wine has been grown, its terroir. And although you can move the wine around, you cannot change where the wine is from. And then finally, well, you tell me what wine is oftentimes a metaphor for, and that this thing wine is being put as a metaphor for is put next to soil, and he's saying the glove recalls these things. So, oh no. And then Iroh asks further, "Where are you from?" And Eganhan says, "No, I'm not telling you." And then they continue on, and then there's a roar, and Eganhan's like, "What was that?" And Iroh's like, "Oh, probably nothing." But Iroh is thinking of monsters of the far world, and we get three wielder bears, which are giant bears, Tenalian hounds, which are these hounds that have carapaced hides and presumably a paralytic bite, and then worms of distant Talmai. And then we get some spooky thing about gold coming cheaper than justice and is only being half as rare. But it doesn't say anything. And then here we get this description about the uh, the train. Essentially, they are on a cliff, and the cliff runs north south. To the west is the cliff going up, and to the west is the cliff going down, and to the east is the cliff going up. And then the noise returns, and the horses are absolutely spooked. And Iroh says, "No." Um, Egghead says, do you still think it was some animal?" And Iroh says, "No, I don't." And Egghead is like, "Okay, then what is it?" And Iroh says, "That is not yet for me to say, my lord," which is very, very snarky for Iroh. And Egghead does not like the snark, but they keep on going. And then Iroh is just thinking about Edmund. He's just thinking about Edmund. He's just hate maxing, essentially. Sometimes he will be found. But then the sound returns, and with it, cracked stone and dead trees, which the idea of cracked stone has been associated with something before. And here we have a roar, and this creature, well, they perch bat-like on this outcropping jutting in front of them. And well, this bat-like, well, you can debate what you think the old man of the mountain looks like, but in my mind, well, I won't say, but the fact that it perches bat-like suggests one kind of anatomy as opposed to another. But Iroh has never seen a dragon before. A dragon, the Old Man of the Mountain is a dragon, as established in the previous chapter, has been alluded to in previous chapters as well. So Iroh and Eganan get ambushed by the Old Man of the Mountain, a creature out of legend. Iroh, never having seen a dragon before, is trying to comprehend the thing before him in a very sort of Lovecraftian horror kind of way. So it talks about its size, it talks about its color, and the color. What is the color of eternity? Just for the audience, uh, for your question, what is the color of eternity? For my mind, the color of eternity is a gold because gold does not tarnish, but also because the motif of a dark color juxtaposed against gold is a recurring motif in the story, and the old man of the mountain has golden eyes, and the eyes watch him nagging with cool intelligence, waiting for either them or the petrified horse to move. And Iroh's like, "How does such a thing exist?" And what did exist? It's there, and there's sort of this hypnotic effect where the entire world falls away. It's just them. And then Eggenhand, whereas Iroh is shocked into silence, Eggenhand is more or less having a religious epiphany. He's like, "Oh my God, the legends are real. If these are real, what other things are real?" Although this idea of what is true, it's not vanity but true inspiration. What does that mean? We'll see. But providence, providence is the idea of divine will. It is the idea that God or the gods or something like that has some kind of design for the world. You can call this destiny, you can call this God's plan, you can call this the flow of causality, you can call this a lot of things. I believe Aristotle's term for it is like the is like the prime mover, or like the thing that moves other things, or like ta'aitia, the source. And the inside the maw of the deep, the dark of the abyss, that there's this conflation between there's a conflation between death, the deep ocean, the deep dark of caves, and so on, that there's this vast darkness, and this is a darkness that is inside the old man of the mountain. And the old man of the mountain is about to like do its breath weapon attack, and Aeril is again hypnotized, but then runs again, get out of the way. And then we have the shadow breath of the old man of the mountain, and it completely blasts the mountainside apart, and Aeril falls. As he falls, he hears his mother's voice. "Oh, my dear, why have you abandoned me?" And then darkness follows. And here we have a sort of also, it should be noted that Eggenhand is afraid. Why exactly Eggenhand is afraid? Well, maybe he's about to be eaten by a dragon, but he might be afraid for other reasons. That of all the things he could account for, he could not account for this, as Iroh later laughs about. But Aeril is drifting atop a wide dark sea, Oinops Pontos in ancient Greek, which is a recurring motif in the Odyssey and Iliad. Visions come from the deep, whispers of the past, and here we have Whispers the Deep, which is the running title of the story. Whispers of the past and the future. And here we have this very striking image of this door with barred by these spears embedded in bones. And there's someone who says, "You must live." Um, what a daughter I'll have is the one who bears my curse. So from the thing we learn, I will go over this later in the chapter when we get to the dream sequence, but this is important. Essentially, there's some door somewhere, and if Iroh, or rather the person Iroh is dreaming himself being his grandfather, doesn't live, he's not gonna get to see what's behind that door. And then here we have one of the most blatant sections in the entire story so far. But Iroh's body is broken. That when he comes back to consciousness, we first get his breathing, we then get the time of day, then we get the fact that he's alive, and then we get his position, and then we get slowly more and more of his surroundings. The cicadas, um, his lack of eyesight, he remembers his lack of eyesight, and then we get the tips of pines scraping a bleeding sky. And then we get the cracked ruins of a cliff, and he's abandoned. He's by himself. And I was like, whoa, it was a real dragon. And then his body is absolutely fucked. So to list off Iroh's injuries, Iroh is currently healing from a broken eye. Iroh also got his left hand scraped up in the forest when he got his eye, when he lost his eye. To build off that, Iroh's right shoulder is dislocated. Iroh's left forearm has been fractured. Iroh has a broken rib. Iroh has a concussion, and Iroh is generally just not having a good time. But all these wounds are, while they're debilitating, none of them are fatal, and this is something which Iroh realizes. But Iroh waking up at sunset and that being abandoned by everyone, finding that his arm doesn't work, and then um yeah, and then realizing that he's dead, left for dead, and that like he has hit rock bottom. His body is broken. He doesn't have use of his arm, and he's lost his amulet. Um, Iroh Iroh has hit rock bottom. And then what else is there to do but laughs? He laughs a dry, tongueless laugh, which this entire set of paragraphs right here is a reference to something. It's a very um aesthetically direct callback, if you would say, with when you put in with similar themes blooming in similar ways. But Iroh lays back and accepts his death, that he waits for the vultures, the ravens, and then the funny thing is that Iroh being is actually literally right now a raven between rocks and the sky, between the mountain and the sky, which is the thing on his noble house's crest. And the life-sapping shadow flame of the old man of the mountain, which cracks stone and devour him to godly eternity. That essentially, if the old man of the mountain is a god, being eaten by the old man of the mountain is being taken into the body of God, which is becoming immortal. But Aeril doesn't want to die, and we learn more about these cultures of the White Hills. And Aeril raises his broken arm and begins to pray. And he sees Origin's Hall in his mind's eye, and he misses her woman, the woman he had met, whose name was whose name had been Anathema. We don't know who she is, but she'll be important later. Don't worry. And he tries to speak, but there's blood. And then he sees Edmund looking down at him, and Edmund being surrounded by clouds in the sky with this very angelic kind of thing. And Edmund sneers at him. And this sneer relights the fire in Iril's heart. And his scabbed fingers on his left hand tighten around the prince's throat. And he is just like, Aeril is now being sustained by hate. It is the thing keeping him going. He has to live, if only to right that wrong, if only to kill Edmund. And he's now employing his medical knowledge that he learned from his time at the Alabastron. And we have this very painful section of him arching his back and then putting some bone in his mouth. He's not thinking very straight. He has a concussion. And then he forcibly relocates his arm, which is incredibly painful if done suddenly. But his right arm is complete again, which is itself the last my arm is complete again is a line from the musical Sweeney Todd, and this is fun with Iroh being like aha, but the joke is that Sweeney Todd says this upon getting his instruments to which he's going to murder people with in a revenge plot, so it's all very thematically resonant, but Iroh's like oh the Ibex horn is gone too, but Iroh then rips apart his riding scarf and, being sustained by just pure hate, makes some casts for himself. But he needs, he says, although distant, we remembered his training. We don't know exactly when this training was, presumably some point in the past 5 years. He says that this is if I have a few days. And then Iroh looks east, and then he starts laughing because it's like, well, Paganhan couldn't have predicted that. So it's rather fun, but he's like, wait a minute. If I the Eigenhand's goal was to recruit me, and he recruited me. But I got everything I wanted then. But if I got everything I wanted, why do I need to keep on hunting Edmund to kill him eventually? Couldn't Iroh just let go? And then Iroh basically shakes the thought from his head and says, essentially, no, I can't let go. I can't turn back. I have to do this because this hatred is keeping Iroh going at this point because Iroh has nothing else. He's no food, he has no water. It's the middle of summer, he's in a forest, but he needs food and water. And Iroh hobbles along and finds a berry bush. But the berry bush, they're poisoned berries. He can't eat them, and Iroh scrapes his hands. There's this old quote about really just putting your characters through the ringer, and Iroh's hands get scraped and scabbed and burned, and his hands are just being absolutely messed up in this chapter, and it's a bit funny actually. But there are wolves, and Iroh's like, oh, right, I've been surrounded by bones. Of course there are wolves, and he runs, but then he falls into a cave, and this cave being the den of a mountain lion with the idea of the drums of the deep being actually the sound of blood in Iroh's ear. But this whole thing is meant to be a reference to the going into the underworld, the catabasis of Ekid 3. And Iroh goes down, crawling away from the light of day, and then he finds water under the earth. And if you go down, so the idea Iroh has gone, metaphorically speaking, Iroh has gone down to the underworld. He's gone away from the light of day, he's crawled down a cave and found water. So this water is then like the river Styx, or like the waters of death in the Epic Gilgamesh, some kind of barrier that separates the realm of the living from the realm of the dead. And Iroh drinks. He drinks, he lowers his head as if to pray, but instead drinks. And the waters, like the berries, are bitter. But Iroh doesn't care at this point, so he just keeps on drinking. And we get the idea that the cave is dark, it is away from the light of day, but we don't know how dark it is actually. It might be pitch black. It might be that there is just a bit enough light, but to see things. But as Iroh's drinking, the cavern's wall became known, and this is either This is one of three things. This is Aeril feeling around on the cave walls with his bloodied hands. This is Iroh's eyes adjusting to the dark, or this is something magical where Iroh is being granted some kind of ability to see in the dark. But regardless, next to the pool is a pit, and well, go being in a pitch dark room and finding a pit there is a reference to Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Pit and the Pendulum, which takes place during the Spanish Inquisition. But highly recommend reading. I'm actually go read after this because it's a very good story. But Iroh looks down to the pit and he thinks death lurks down there. But Iroh and he thinks about how they're also all the monsters. They emphasize how the shadows of Sharon Clearsight and the Prince of Beasts and Lord of Blackbirds. However, they are all a piece, a shadow of one truth. They are all one of a piece, and they all reflect some greater meaning. However, what that meaning is, that is not yet quite to say, but you might have been able to pick up on some of the things which are the things going on. But Iroh then thinks about offering light to the darkness, a yellow flame down into the black abyss. And then he also, because he did that once in the Chasm of the Crypt, to which this tunnel is this pit, which seems to be lined with bricks to his hands, is being paralleled too. But he thinks instead of throwing himself in, offering himself as the flame. But either way, either the darkness rises out of the pit, or he he falls asleep. But it's like Iroh falls asleep, but it's unclear like what the mechanism is. Maybe the water made him fall asleep. Maybe he just passed out from exhaustion. Maybe some kind of like sleep miasma came out of the pit. But either way, Iroh dreams of it again being his grandfather, and we now get Auril Argent dreaming about his daughter. The daughter was Auril's daughter, and Auril's daughter was the Lady Shoshana, which is Iroh's mother. So Auril is Iroh's maternal grandfather. And then here we have Auril in some strange city, which seemed to have been the city in the snow dreamed of in Iroh 4. Um, and he's begging his child, the one who bears his curse, which would be Shoshana's sister, if not Shoshana herself, to this elder who seems to be in charge of some kind of organization there. And this elder is like, yeah, no, we can't take her. But then Iroh's grandfather reveals that he has the ability to see evil spirits. And these evil spirits, one of them was the Lord of Blackbirds, who talked to him and told him about this curse. And we also know that Charon, this other mythological character, has been mentioned a couple times, is another person, is someone else who could see spirits, but like spirits more broadly rather than evil spirits. And how this relates to Auril's curse, perhaps it's that this curse is this ability or something of that sort. So we then learn, however, that the elder somehow, in some kind of like dream logic, is Eggenhand. So here we have Auril Argent essentially asking Eggenhand to take this child who shouldn't exist, because Shoshana hasn't been mentioned to have any siblings. You think it would have came up at least once, especially like Fortuna talking. And then with this person saying, "How many children do you think would how many children do you think we would have that have the curse? How many daughters?" This combined with the fact that Shoshana has no daughter, combined with the discussion of loss later in the chapter, combined with Auril's fears that something will happen to the child, all relate to the fact that this child died, and then Auril and Sammy had another child, and that child was Shoshana. So this is very strange because these series of events, the events of Iroh 5, the events of Iroh 4, is now suggesting something very, very strange indeed. It is suggesting that Iroh is having Iroh is having dreams in which is being revealed to him knowledge that he should not be able to have a priori. That Iroh is being granted special knowledge about his grandfather's past, which he should not have, which he otherwise shouldn't really have access to for some reason. So how Iroh is knowing these things? Is he being visited by his grandfather in his dreams? Um, is he is he actually reliving memories from his grandfather? We don't know for certain what's exactly going on, but what's clear is that Iroh is being granted some kind of special knowledge of the past, of things happening in the past, and it's not all real. Because how then, how could this old man be Egg in Hand, and then we see Egg in Hand, what, 50 years later? How does that work? And then what is this impossible city in the north? Who how does it all connect? There's something else going on here, the piece of which is missing. There's something else going on here, but as it stands, it seems Iroh is not just having dreams of being his grandfather. Iroh is having dreams of literally being his grandfather. But in his dreams, he's not dreaming of being his grandfather. In his dreams, he is his grandfather, and we don't know where it's going from this quite yet. But Iroh, even more weirdly, when he awakes, he was by the pool, and now he's back at the top of the cave, and he throws up, and he's just not having a good time. He's got to get to Fair Calais before his enemies, and then Aeril says, I've got to get to Fair Calais, but Aeril says, he's like, I've got to get to Fair Calais before Edmund's enemies kill him, because Lucian was talking with Edmund and Fortune too, but Fortune and Iroh were also there. And Iroh realizes he's not going to be able to get to Fair Calais because he's in no shape to get to Fair Calais whatsoever. And so rather than Iroh says, Iroh takes for granted that he's going to get better, that he's going to get to Fair Calais, and that he's going to get to murder Edmund. None of those things are in question for him. And then, but in order to make this logic work, he's like, okay, I have to trust in Lucian that Lucian is going to be able to stop whatever conspiracy is against Edmund, because otherwise, what am I doing? Which is honestly very funny. And that essentially Iroh says, I have to trust in Lucian, and then I'll have to trust that Lucian forgives me for what I'm going to do, and that I will be able to succeed where Edmund's adversaries failed due to Lucian's abilities. And then Iroh fails to get up. He falls asleep again, and then there's a rabbit, and then he breaks the rabbit's neck and then he eats it. But Iroh doesn't have the equipment to just Iroh doesn't have the equipment to say gut the rabbit or clean the rabbit or take off its skin, so he's just roasting that thing whole. And then he rips off the charred skin and he's not even eating it fully cooked. And then but he's again just being sustained by hate. He crawls back into the earth, and when he drinks more of the waters, and then when he comes back up, he sees the shadow on the wall, but the shadows on the wall are being cast by him, which, if you know Plato's allegory of the cave, that this should be ringing some bells. That he sees shadows on the walls, and he recognizes the shadows of the wall as his progenitors wearing crowns of iron and true orichalcum swords. And then, but the thing is, the shadows are being cast by himself and his surroundings, and then they clutch his skull and tell him, a daughter shall be a bearer of your curse, which seems to be like Aeril Argent's thing. So what's going on exactly? But Iroh's tripping balls point is, and then Iroh wakes up and the moon is half full. Iroh is half alive, half dead. He's coming or going, and there's a dog howling. And then he sees a woman. He recognizes her as his beloved. And if we are going this idea that Iroh is conflating himself and his grandfather with like the destroyed hand and the dreams and things like that, the person he should be seeing his beloved is Sammy. Although we know from Fortuna 4, that Sammy and Kanta look very similar. So he's seeing his beloved, but like a familial beloved. So there's a conflation of the different terms of love. That it is a familial thing as opposed to like a romantic thing. But he sees a woman point and goes towards her. And um, she's crying, looking for a dog, but actually she's looking for presumably Iroh, or rather Auril, and she says, looking for a dog, says, "Come here, boy," and find him, bring him to me. So presumably in the what actually is going on is Iroh seems to be having some kind of waking dream, point is. And then he has this conversation where he's talking with Sammy, but also talking with this woman, and it's all very vague, but it seems to be they're talking about the child from the previous dream who has now died. And Iroh is talking about how a legend did it, but he's talking about how a legend also made him fall off the cliff. It's all very double entendre. And then she says, "Come here to me, hold me, comfort me because I've lost my way, I've lost my child, I've lost my dog, blah, 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 blah." And then she says, "Bend your neck for me." And then suddenly the vision changes. He's no longer looking at a crying woman with a mourning ribbon. He's looking at Jemshuk Sortira, the god of death, with gems beneath her eyes and a chain of silver. And he's the dog, or rather, the dog is the dogs which howl at the approach of the god of death. And now she, as if a human to a dog, is going to chain him up and bring him to the afterlife. She's just come to me. And Iroh freaks out and runs away. So Iroh essentially has been approached by Lady Death in the wood, saying, "Come with me, I will bring you to a different place." And he runs away. Iroh wants to live. And then Iroh talked about how something people can do is to forsake their name, to change their name, to try and avoid the god of death. And this is divest yourself of everything. And then Iroh is not named in the rest of the chapter. He jumps into the cave, huddles into there until dawn, and then Iroh is rescued by the sound of a lamb, which, well, let's do some math real quick. So Iroh falls into the cave on day one. We have the stuff, the rabbit and the cicadas on day two, and then here we have Iroh being rescued on day three. So Iroh has spent 3 days in a cave and is rescued by a lamb. Oh my, I wonder what this could be a reference to. But Iroh cries, and Iroh is either crying tears, crying for help, or something like that. But that's the end of the chapter. And, well, yeah, it's a lot. Next time we're going to be discussing, and I think it should be actually Ekin 5, which is going to be a very interesting chapter where we get to tie up a lot of the previous threads in Ekin's plotline, and I'm really looking forward to it. See you all then.